I have a virtual handout. What I'm going to talk about was published on mediate.com. There's the link for you if you would like to read the article. My name is John Potter. I'm an associate professor in human-centered interdisciplinary studies program in the Simmons School here at Southern Methodist University. We're going to talk about dancing with disagreement. Let me begin with a premise. The premise is this. You do not have to be particularly clever. You don't have to be wise. You don't have to be smart to make things worse. It doesn't require any particular skill. We humans are adept at making things difficult, making things hard, making things uncomfortable. But what we're going to do is we're going to spend 35 or 40 minutes talking about how to engage constructively with disagreement. There are lots of books, crucial conversations, difficult conversations, lots of books about this topic. But in my experience, what I have found is that all that stuff goes out the window when someone's in your face. And so we're going to build a 3-step model that you can remember easily, access easily, and use effectively time and time again. So here's how we start. Oops. Sure, support. See. What did I do wrong?
Was it not working earlier?
It worked.
Huh. Well, you should do the arrow there, over there. Just do the arrow on the keyboard.
Keyboard.
There.
Uh-huh.
There it is.
There it is. Mouse back.
Okay.
So there are 3 steps. Here's the first one. Ask questions. So someone comes to you and they're hostile or they're aggressive. Somehow they make you feel uncomfortable. The first thing that you should consider is asking questions. The reason for this is if I ask you a question, you have to think about the answer. You have to back up. Does that make sense? In other words, you're coming at me, you're aggressive. I ask you a question, you either have to stop and think about the answer, or you have to back up and think about what your response is going to be. So first, ask questions. And it goes like this. What you want to do to the best of your ability is to ask questions either about content or about process. And let me give you a great example of a content circumstance. In the postmodern world that we live in, many people, activists in particular, are masters at this, is using words that have double meanings or triple meanings. And so under the circumstance, I might ask you, could you tell me what you mean when you say so-and-so? In my own work, I am surprised how many times my understanding of what the word meant is completely different than the person who's talking to me uses it. So it's a real simple content question. You could also ask questions about process. Process questions, here's a really great example of a process question. If you keep interrupting me, I don't know how I'll be able to continue to talk to you. How do you think we should deal with that? Really simple. Yeah, here's another thing to think about questions. If you ask only one question, you get limited information. If you ask 5 or more questions based on a lot of doing this a lot, you sound annoying. So the easiest way to do this is just ask you. Does that make sense? Really straightforward. In your head, ask 3 questions. What do you mean when you say so-and-so? How do you think we should proceed? What caused you to care so much about this topic versus that topic? and so on and so forth. And there are lots of questions that you can use, and I'll show you a really modern way to ask 3 questions really quickly in just a moment. But here's a question you don't want to ask, and that is why? Why is a dead-end street? What do you suppose most people who are angry and hostile and aggressive will say when you ask why? Because. Right? So now the conversation is over. So I avoid why questions. I will ask them if I have to, but I try to avoid why questions. Make sure I cover all of this. Yeah. Now, let me demonstrate one other idea that will make asking questions easier for you to access when you need it. So think about asking questions somatically. So Silas is in front of me, and he comes at me and he says, I've got a problem with something you did or said, or your behavior, or where you parked your car, or whatever. And so when I ask a question, in my mind, I'm thinking about pushing him away. So when I ask a question, Silas either has to stop to answer the question, or he has to back up to think about it. Now, in general, I don't want to ask a really complicated question, like the meaning of life is not a good question. But I might ask something pretty direct. Well, now, so in my mind, I'm pushing him away. And as soon as he backs away from me, now I'm more confident. And it happens really quick. Our brains are so fast at processing threats. We are so good at this that as soon as he, even if he just backs up physically 1 inch, I feel better. So asking questions is how we start a conversation like this. If you have a question, by the way, and you want to do it by voice or on Zoom, I'm so used to Zoom, I think of Zoom as a person. That's just, but you get the idea, and you can practice this. Let me tell you a great way to practice this. Podcast. So find some podcast, put on by somebody that you don't necessarily like or agree with politically, socially, sports-wise. It doesn't make any difference. And so listen a little bit, and then when it gets to a certain place, just pause and ask a question and see if the podcaster asks the question the same way that you do. And I will tell you, just yesterday, there's a great example of this with someone who I don't necessarily agree with politically, but he is very smart and very talented. And I just can't remember his name, isn't that terrible? He's an English guy, thin, brown hair, just, what's it?
What is the podcast about?
It's about the Middle East. It was on Al Jazeera. He got in. It's Friday. Murray, right? Murray. Anyway, what happens is this reporter comes at him aggressively. And rather than argue, he asks questions. And you can see the conversation fall apart, right? Because of his ability just to ask questions. He doesn't have to argue, he doesn't have to disagree, all he has to do is ask. And it's a great thing to be able to. That's the first thing. So here's a second. Make statements. So ask, make statements. So when you make a statement, I've asked you 3 questions, and I have a better idea of what's important to you every time I ask a question, odds are you will give an answer that's longer than my question. If I say, what's the meaning of life? You're going to give me a 5-minute answer. Every time you talk, I learn about you. Every time I talk, you learn about me. Does that make sense? So every time I ask a question, I'm increasing my understanding of you, which is valuable. So eventually, let's say I ask 3 questions. Now I want to make a statement. There are all kinds of ways to do this, but here's the most important part about making a statement: nouns and verbs. The more adjectives, the more adverbs, the more color, the more bells and whistles you put around the statement, the less impact that it has. Statement needs to be direct, but it needs to have a tone that's not offensive. Let me give you an example of that. For questions, the word I like to use is curiosity. So imagine you have a nephew, and you take the nephew to the Dallas Zoo, and your nephew sees a giraffe for the very first time. And your nephew comes to you and innocently and curiously says, you know, hey, what is that tall thing with the brown spots with the long hair? Right? That's the way you should ask questions. If someone's hostile this way, your question is down here. Like in my experience, every time I approach the same tone as the other person, the more likely it is the conversation gets worse, doesn't get better. And this is all revolving around an idea I'll build up to here in just a little bit about receptiveness. So stay with me for a moment. I ask a question, you respond. Ask a question, you respond. Ask a question, you respond. Here's a really simple way to make a statement. I don't understand. Right? There are no bells and whistles. It's just a statement. I don't understand. Now, let's suppose that the person I'm talking to, they say something like this to me. They say, what would be a really great way to say it? They would say something. You know what? I am really tired of talking to old white men who are college professors and think they know everything. How about that? So my response is what? I go back to questions and I ask 3. Does that make sense? I'm not going to take the bait. If you're going to come at me after I made a statement, I'm not going to take the bait. I'm not going to make another statement. I've already made a statement. I don't understand. But I'll go back and ask 3 more questions. Now, let me just tell you this. This model that I'm demonstrating for you, I've used over and over and over and over and over again. And you know how many times the person I'm talking to has figured out what I'm doing? 0. Not one time. And the reason for that is they are so self-absorbed in about what they want to do that you are not even important. You're important as a participant, but you're not important. They don't figure it out. And it's really safe. Okay, so now I've made my statement. I don't understand. Or how about this one? I don't see this the same way. Now, here's the option here is the other person says to me, they ask me a question, right? If they do that, then the whole tone of the conversation's changed. Or I might say something like, wow, I didn't expect that. There are another 20 examples I could give, but that's the idea. So now what happens is I make a statement, the other person reacts, maybe I'll go back to my 3 questions. do it one more time. Then I make another statement. Then I go back to the question. Then I make another statement. And let's say we're at a place now where I have a reasonable idea of what's important and what's not important, what I need to talk about, what I don't need to talk about, whether or not we can move forward, whether it might be good for me just to jump out the window, right? And so now I've gotten information. So when I ask a question, somatically, I'm doing this, right? When I make a statement, what I'm doing is I'm saying no further. Stop right here. In other words, I'm establishing a boundary. Stops here. Or someone says, here's a really great example. If you're a faculty member, staff member, particularly like if you work in residence hall and you take phone calls from angry parents who are upset because the shower water is not warm enough for their son or daughter, those kinds of things. What you can do when you make a statement is you're protecting yourself. Somebody comes at you with great hostility, you're really angry and they're cursing at you. When you make that statement, just think about stopping the person right here. And again, you just go back over and over and over and over again. One of the things that I find really interesting about this kind of dialogue in the modern world is if I have a plan, if I have this rubric I can follow, I'm pretty comfortable. I'm generally okay. The other person, they might be really agitated, poorly focused. They might be a social activist and they've gone to the website Beautiful Trouble and learned how to agitate. But it doesn't matter. I don't care what their first language is. I don't care, if they grew up in Detroit or Dallas or Los Angeles. It just doesn't matter to me. So we go back and forth. Let's go one. And now comes the hardest one. Predicting consequences. So let me show you how that works. Make sure I did this. Oh, yeah, I want to make sure. Yeah. So I don't use this very often, but there are overt and covert messages. So if you're familiar with microaggressions and micro invalidations, those kinds of things, that's a very much a college and university behavior. It happens in other places, but it's more of an issue for colleges. So you can use the same idea here in dealing with it. So you're mixing the covert and overt messages. So you might say something like, oh, do you really think or feel a certain way? That's or I might make a statement, or how about this? This is even better. Would you mind repeating that? So I want to make sure I understood what you said. Then I make a statement, and I say something like, well, I don't see the world the same way. Right? Yeah, that's the idea. So this works for death threats, it works for microaggressions, it works for all things. But eventually, you have to do something, right? So now we're going to predict consequences. This comes in two forms, but the principle underneath it is straightforward. It's an if-then statement. So here's how that works. There are consequences for me. Let me here's the really you know what? If you keep yelling at me and cutting me off, I'm going to threaten talking. I'm going to ask you to leave. I'm going to call campus police. So on and so consequence for me. Now the problem here is you've had a little bit of time to understand the circumstances. You've had a little bit of time to build some kind of superficial relationship with this person. Whether you agree with them or don't agree with them, or understand them or don't understand them, it doesn't make sense. But when you predict a consequence, you cannot, under any circumstances, back off. You cannot change your mind. You can't turn right or left. You have to stand your ground right where you are. And this little bit of time that you've had with this person should give you confidence to be able to predict the consequence. Does that make sense? Because what do you suppose happens if I say I'm going to do something and then I don't do it? Does it encourage the other person to come at me more aggressively? Does it cause them to retreat? Does it cause them to go to the right or left? No, it causes them to come right at me for your purpose. So when you do this, you have to stand by it. Even if you're wrong by it, which I have been many times, I still stand by it because the cost of standing by it is way less than giving it, especially in the modern world. All right, so now the other prediction consequence is what's going to happen when that person leaves their conversation with you and joins the regular community. So if you go from here outside to the front of Dallas Hall and you talk like this or say these kinds of things, I'm pretty sure you're going to find out that a lot of people who are walking around Dallas Hall are going to feel the same way I do, or they're going to disagree with you, right? Predicting consequences. I can predict them for me, or I can predict them for the person when they engage with others. That's the idea. Okay, so you have this model, this time somatically. Ask questions, back up, make a statement, stand your ground, predict consequences, you just lighten them. It's just like they're litter on your desk and you're just cleaning your desk. I'm done with you, or I'm still done with you and good luck. Yeah, that's the idea. So for me, if it escalates, I can either remember the words, which are not that hard, ask questions, make statements, predict consequences. Or I can just think about the body movement. I can just think somatically. Oh, what do you mean when you say that? I don't want to do it. If you keep yelling at me, I'm gonna leave. Right? Depending on how much energy is involved, how tired I am, how uncomfortable I am with the topic, I'll use it. Yeah. I want to spend 5 or 10 minutes on receptiveness. Because in the year 2024, this is for me the hardest thing to do. And the ideas we're going to talk about are promulgated principally by an associate professor in management, I believe. She's at Harvard, Jillian is. So we're going to talk about this. It does me no good to put you off. It doesn't do any good for me. If you have a legitimate thing you're upset about, it does me no good to drive you away. In fact, I can't even ask questions, make statements, or predict consequences if there's not at least enough trust for us to talk. And one of the most difficult things right now in the year 2024 is this idea that people don't talk to each other. And you may or may not know this, but there are reputation management consulting firms all over the world that research how people interact on social media and so on and so forth. And they will tell you what words you can use to trigger something. They will tell you words and phrases to avoid. It's unbelievable. You as an individual, you are so outdone, outmanned, overwhelmed by this universe of information that someone can have about how to escalate conflict, it's really hard. The only chance you have is to make the conversation human-centered, to make it such that there's no separateness. You know, Silas and I, we are different ages, we're different races, we probably have different degrees, we grew up in different places. He might like the Cowboys, I might think they suck. You know, right? We could be very, very different. But if I handle myself well, if I do it the right way, he'll always talk. And even if we disagree about whatever it is that we're talking about, we've at least had an opportunity to give it a try. If that makes sense. Because otherwise, what happens so often is as soon as Silas figures out that I'm not like him, there's no conversation. Does that make sense? There's just this wall that comes up, rather than being an opportunity for the two of us to talk about something that we might both benefit from learning more about from each other. In fact, in polarization, it used to be 5 years ago, 10 years ago, the polarization was just my group and your group, right? The green team over here and the yellow team over here. We didn't talk to each other. And all we did was worried about defections. You know, if somebody leaves our group and joins the other group and gives them all our secrets, all that kind of stuff. But now it's way more complicated. There's so much reactivity that what happens is not only am I on the yellow team, but I live and die for the opportunity to carry my flag or to scream my slogan or to wear my billboard or whatever. It's my whole life to make it worse. Right? It's not me just protecting my people in my group. It's me looking at the other side across the river and saying, you know what? It's not enough to be a citizen of this group. I've got to go get you people. And that's a huge, huge problem. So that's the idea. As soon as he is human to me and I am human to him, we have an opportunity to have a conversation. Does that make sense? Everybody okay so far? All right. So I'll play a game. Yeah, oh, he was, yeah. Yeah. See now, Silence, trust me, he wants to play the game. Doesn't know what the game is. It could be Russian roulette. All right. So let's do this. I'll tell you what, you pick a topic, any topic. It can be as difficult as you want it to be, anything you want. And I'll take you all on. Okay? I just need one person who will help. Anybody want to volunteer to help?
Can we do it, since we're here, there's Guildhall video games.
Yeah, we can do video games. Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, video, yeah. About,
Could be anything related.
yeah, let's do something really modern, like Jane Frankie or those, Jonathan Haidt, who stated, you know, video games cause people to lose their spirituality and their moral compass, and so on, so something like that. Yeah. Okay. So start, somebody get it going. One.
Video games cause people to lose their moral.
Okay. All right. 3 simple recipe questions. How do you know that? Time's up.
Have you done your research?
I haven't done my research. I haven't answered everything.
So,
I thought there my research. I thought, you probably saw it.
yeah. Hey, we are in the Ford building.
Yeah. An article, I podcast.
Yeah. So stick with me for a second. When I asked really gently, it's not an aggressive question at all, and you hesitate, you told me everything I knew. Right? In other words, you have a belief, you have something that you think is important to you, but you've not really tested. And the reason for that is the way our modern world works is as soon as I get a hold of your soul, I will take it with everything I can get. If I'm a Republican or a Democrat, or I'm carrying a pride flag or Confederate flag or a Palestinian flag, or I'm wearing a San Francisco 49ers t-shirt, as soon as I get you into my group, I will conscientize you and you will belong. Right? Does that make sense? So that's a great litmus test. How do you know? Right? So let's get a better, let's get a better response. So how do you know that? Like, what would be a more direct, sort of forceful comeback? What would be a better? No offense.
No.
Yeah.
Because
we trust each other. Yeah.
You say something I've read a compelling argument online.
Yeah.
They made a strong argument.
Perfect. Right. I read an article online. What was the title of the article? See?
There you go.
What was it?
How video games.
Oh, yeah. Oh, wow. Okay. Can you tell me more about it?
Yes, so it's done by a researcher.
Tell me about that. Yeah.
From Harvard University.
Yeah.
In detail in ways in which he made a real compelling argument.
Can you tell me more about what you mean when you use the word compelling?
Yes, because he talked about the brain's function. I'm totally making this.
I know.
Me too.
But, and he talked about the synapses that the brain makes when it's playing a game, and how that can really disrupt your world.
Ready?
Because
Hold
it's
on.
rewiring.
Right.
I guess compared to not playing.
So, how much energy do you think this costs? Zero. Nothing, right? Nothing. Right? How do you know that? You have to respond. So you're using more energy on learning about it. Then we go along a little bit and you say something that gives me the chance to say compared to what, right? And now you have to think again, like maybe you think, okay, water.
So what happens if instead I said to you, what is it that you need to know?
I'm not sure.
Understand what I'm saying?
I'm not sure.
Should I send you the article? So you can
That'd be great.
Okay, fine. Let's discuss it after the meeting.
Okay. I don't mind doing that. You're the one who brought the topic up. Right? So if I can buy, if you're gonna send me the article, I'll read it. I can read research. I've been doing that for 50 years. I have that time, right? And then we can get back together, and you know what I would do? I would start out exactly the same. And you wouldn't, and you could, now you're so you wouldn't have to get away with it. But let's assume you didn't know, then, I would do it the same way. Let's keep going. And the what? And then let's say let me make it. You say the government needs to do something. Oh no, how about this? Let's do stochastic terrorism. Somebody needs to stop kidnapping. How about that? That's a really good possess. So what I would say is, who decides? So, trick 3 questions. How do you know that? Compared to what? Who decides? Right? You said somebody needs to do something about it. I said, please. You want to be the US government, the nations, how about the faculty of SMU? I've made you tell me what's important. Does that make sense? And it costs me nothing. I'm not, my heart's not beating, my brain's not exhausted, I've got more dopamine than I can use, I'm like, okay. And when we talk about this, particularly when I talk about this with clients, they're always worried about making it perfect. Like Addie says to me something, and I'd say something, and I think, oh man, I wish I would have said it differently, or more thoughtfully, or used a different word. Forget it. This is just about being better than average. That's all it is. You don't have to be, PR. You don't have to be McKinsey or any of those. Does that make sense? So it's all very much about engaging in conversation at the same time I'm protecting my soul. I don't want you to get inside me and hurt me. I don't want that. So that's the way. So let me just review. This is important. Let me just review the real simple process. Ask questions, make statements, predict consequences, repeat. Right? If it's questions, repeat, statements, repeat, it's consequences, go back to questions, then statements, then consequences, just repeat over and over and over again. Just keep doing it until either wear the other person out or they shoot you. One way or the other. You just hang on and hang on and hang on and hang on. Now, in the year 2024, somebody comes at you, especially with a social issue, then you say really simple questions. How do you know that? Compared to what? We just saw. Really simple. And I hope that's helpful to you. Again, I just do this like every day. So for me, if I didn't know how to do this, conflict would be so much harder, so much more difficult. And again, just to emphasize this, if you're involved in a social conflict, part of a tribe or a group or whatever, you have no idea how well prepared your adversary is. None whatsoever. Let me give you a really simple example. If you watch the State of the Union speech, there were people that had on t-shirts. And they would say, I don't know, whatever, like MAGA, or they would say Free Palestine, or From the River to the Sea, or they would say, the Lost Cause, or they would say Go Cowboys. It doesn't make any difference. Do you think that legislators got that idea on their own? Like they woke up one morning and said, oh man, you know what, I need a t-shirt. No, they were taught that by consultants. They get paid a lot of money for doing this because the picture is worth way more than anything anybody will say. Would you like to know why? The why is we process the image like that. When somebody's talking, we have to listen and think about what they're saying, and we have to wait for the sentence to be finished before we know what it is they're saying. So if you give me the right picture, the right image, the right camera angle, everything that happens after that doesn't matter. Does that make sense? This is why you see people do these kinds of things in Congress and all this, right? That's the world we live in. So I hope this technique gives you a buffer when you've got all these people and resources over here on the other side of the river who are looking at you. Anyway, if you have a question, I'll try to answer your question, or I'll finish 5 minutes early and you'll think I'm the best speaker. Any questions?
How do you buffer yourself against the image? Because those images, you see them too. And I agree with you.
Yeah.
You do a whole lot of work with the words.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Yep.
But you don't unsee the image.
Let's take a news article. Let's you and I, we take our smartphone, we open up the New York Times. That's a really good, because they do this really good. I know that the picture is going to capture my soul first. Correct? Yeah, it's supposed to. So when I look at the picture, I let the picture get inside me. And then I pause for a second and I ask the question. Why did they choose that picture? What caused them to choose that picture? Right? Okay. So now I own that picture. Because now I'm thinking about it, not letting it, wash over me. I'm thinking. Then I look at the headline and I go, why did they choose that handle? Right? Like when someone says, oh, here's my favorite. Some people. Right, so think about that. Some people. Yeah. Yeah, well, you're a pro. Yeah, some, right? And then the best part is, I want to make sure that I don't just read the first two. Because the way the stories are written, the contradictory part, the one that makes the story fair instead of biased, is always the second or third story.
Yeah, because all the rest of
Correct.
that is designed by you.
That's exactly right. Now, think about this. We're having this conversation in this room at Southern Methodist University. Do you think the people at 7-Eleven know that? No. Do you think the people at Lamar know that? No. 99.99% of people in this country don't know what we just talked about. So guess what? They are prey. They are manipulated every single day. Just like when Silas and I were talking. I just said, well, how do you know that? Right? And maybe the how do you know that is I got it on Twitter X. Or I got it,
So an excellent case for media literacy.
What's that? Oh, yeah, absolutely. If I could do one thing in my own, are you thrilled with Jean Fleming, who she is? So she's a psychology professor at San Diego State. She's really, really good at this particular topic. If I could do one thing for high school students in this country, would be to teach them how to use their smartphone. But if you're Meta, or you're Google, or you're Elon Musk, or you're Joe Biden, or Donald Trump, or anybody trying to influence and persuade people, they don't want you. Right? If I could do that, if I could teach a 15-year-old girl who is really depressed and anxious how to look at Instagram, I could make their life better before they can think to your point. But most people, they don't understand. This is why, you ever notice that every statement that's explanatory is 3 words? You notice that? We can't process 5 very well, 1's barely enough unless it's just perfect. Like Beyonce, right? That's a 1 word, right? But like a 3 word would be like this. Right. Black lives matter. All lives matter. Fetal lives matter. Some lives matter. Make America great again. Make America great. Right? So all these phrases that get hydrated together. 2, free Palestine. Or I'll do another one. Here's a really good one. Somebody says, from the river to the sea, and your response would be, which would be, right? I've asked people this question. Most people have no idea which.
Yeah, no, I saw something, I think it was like a Palestine, protest. And then somebody went to interview, it was like, which river, which sea? And then they had no idea which river, or which sea they were talking about. And they were like, yeah. So he's like, yeah, you're in the protest. You need to at least know the river and the sea, know the air.
But the purveyor, influence, persuader, they're counting on you now. Yeah, right? Yeah, if I could do just that one, if I could teach, 12-year-olds how to use their smartphone. How many classes do you know here in SMU? Yeah, it's the Jordan.
So we are out of